mean, Trump is so simple-minded sometimes. He doesn't think these are not Sunni states, so to speak. This is not about Shia Sunni thing. They will not be able to defeat 600 million people, no matter how much they do.
Today's the sixth day of the war on Iran by the Zionists and Americans. It's been absolutely devastating so far. Death toll is above 1,000. Most notably, on the first day, the Israelis and Americans killed over 160 schoolgirls aged 7 to 12, and as well as the Ayatollah Khamenei, who is the supreme leader of Iran, as well as the spiritual leader of millions of Muslims across the globe. To join me to discuss the developments, as well as what the future may hold, I'm joined today by the director of the Center for Islam and Global Affairs at Istanbul Salahuddin Zaim University, Professor Sami Al-Arian. Professor, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Some commentators are saying that this war is a distraction from the Epstein files. Marco Rubio essentially said in an interview recently that Israel was leading the charge on this attack and the Americans had to join in to protect their assets. And I've also heard some commenters talk about how actually this is less to do with the Middle East and the Epstein files and maybe more to do with China and cutting off oil and supplies in order to weaken them. What, in your estimation, is the main reason that the US decided to participate in this unprovoked attack on Iran?
There is no doubt that Israel and Netanyahu in particular have been aiming against Iran for many years, not just this year. Obviously, they think that they have won the war after 2 years of a genocide in Gaza, a war of extermination. It was an ethnic cleansing campaign that they tried, obviously, to depopulate, to exile the Palestinians. They failed miserably, but they wrought destruction and mayhem on Gaza, and they're still doing that. That never stopped. But also, they think now that they can impose an Israeli hegemony on the entire region. They think that they have been able to devastate what is called the axis of resistance, not only in Gaza and Palestine, and as they confiscate land and try to annex the West Bank, they're trying certainly to strip Hezbollah and disarm it in Lebanon. And now we have an incursion and possibly a ground invasion of Lebanon. But also they think if they go after Iran, they would have completed this circle. They would have completed the fact that they can say that we are now the undisputed hegemon of the region. And between them and achieving this goal was the devastation in Iran, either through regime change or breakup of the country. And that's what we are seeing this. Netanyahu had 7 visits to the White House. He was able to convince Trump, either through manipulation, through extortion, God knows what arguments he advanced. But certainly, when you look at Trump's advisors, mostly Zionist, hardcore Zionist, and neocons, they were able to get to that point. Now, they really have no coherent strategy of how to do this. They thought first, as Wickoff has confessed before, I think, Fox News, is that when Trump ordered this armada, this huge force around the Gulf, around the Persian Gulf, and surrounding Iran, he thought that somehow Iran will capitulate. And when they did not capitulate, he was wondering. That shows how little Trump knows about the region, about Iran, about its civilization, about its people, about its revolution, about the values and principles that define this nation. He really knows very little about them. And then they thought through a decapitation campaign, both the Israelis and the Americans, they're going to go and take out as many of the leaders, including the top leader, the supreme leader of the country, someone who is revered not just in Iran, but throughout much of the Muslim world, that they somehow Iran would collapse, that somehow Iran would capitulate, would surrender, would submit to the dictates. And of course, that never happened. Actually, it backfired. Within 1 hour, Iran was prepared to go and lash out and, as we've seen, really go after many of the assets. We're talking about American military bases in the region. We're talking about embassies. We're talking about many places where they have interests, economic, military, strategic, and otherwise, as well as On Israel. We're talking about a huge amount of drones and missiles and all kinds of different weapons. And we're still in day six. And they are now talking about that they may run out of interceptors. Iran sends very highly sophisticated drones that cost possibly $50,000 or so. And then they go and try to get it through two interceptors, each one costing about $12 million. That is unsustainable. They talk about that they have destroyed Iranian navy. I think it's premature to declare these things. But even if they did that, Iran still has a lot of assets. We have to understand this is an asymmetric warfare. In other words, this is not your typical conventional war. Iran uses different kind of tactics and using the weak points, the soft points, in order to bring about as much pain on its enemies as possible. We're talking about financial and economic, as they are doing it in the Strait of Hormuz. The Americans say now they're going to send the Navy to escort oil tankers. They can't do that. I mean, even if they bring that, that would be rich targets for the Iranians to get. And of course, with one missile or one boat, one torpedo, they can get the tanker. How can you hide a tanker? You can escort a tanker, but you can't protect a tanker. And if they get a Navy ship uh, uh, that is escorting this, that's going to be even double devastation. The Americans absolutely are out of ideas because their whole campaign was uh, predicated on the fact that the regime would collapse. Now they are talking about arming and instigating Kurdish troops to go into the ground offensive. I mean, if they do that, that would be a tragedy for the Kurds, and of course, it's going to raise a lot of red flags with the Turks. The Turks are extremely sensitive to this issue, and if they get involved, then they have just widened the war. So they are really and the only way you can have a regime change, and it's even doubtful. I think it's very doubtful, but the possibility of a regime change in Iran would mean that they have to have ground invasion, about 600,000 or more. That's not in the offing. That is not even a possibility. The United States is not going to bring about 500,000 soldiers. Where are they going to be stationed at? The Iranian strategy was that not only they're going to go after the United States and the Zionist regime, they have said that even before the war started, it's going to be a regional war. They went after American bases which are everywhere. I mean, most of the Arab states neighboring Iran have American military bases. We're talking about a minimum of 60 American bases. We have also aircraft carriers. We have this naval armada being assembled there. We have huge, according to the Americans, there are about 50,000 soldiers. 50,000 soldiers are not about to invade Iran. They will be wiped out. So they need at least 12 times that amount to have an impact. They're not going to bring about 600,000 people here. So, how are they going to bring regime change? That is almost impossible for them to pull out. They just made a gamble and they lost that gamble. So, the best they can have is to drag this on. We have a war of attrition. And a war of attrition will probably be more to the advantage of Iran than to the advantage of the Americans or the Israelis. The Israelis, they have shut down now the whole country for 6 days. If that continues for another few weeks or a month or more, then the whole economy of Israel is devastated. This is an artificial country. Israel is an artificial country. Iran is a country that goes into thousands of years of civilization, a country of 92 million people, 1.7 million kilometers square. So are they going to devastate every single inch of it? Of course not. When you look at Israel, mandated Palestine is 27,000 square kilometers. If you exclude the West Bank, so the targets that Iran needs to focus on is probably 22,000 square kilometers, but possibly just Greater Tel Aviv. 44% of Israelis live in Greater Tel Aviv. So we're talking about a few hundred kilometers square. Now, if they just concentrate on that, and if Hezbollah has joined this struggle, then we're talking about a formidable amount of missiles that could devastate this society. Now, you have about 7.2 million or so Israeli Zionists inside the country. Uh, Most of them actually have no connection to the land. Most of them came in just in the past 50, 60 years. 2 million came since 1990. These people have no connection to the land. They didn't come there to be shut out. They didn't come there to die. They're going to leave. Eventually, they're going to, they came here for a life of comfort. They came there so that they can have nice facilities and nice life as they were promised by the Zionists. They're going to leave. Compare that with people who have been living there for thousands of years, and they're going to defend their country to the utmost, to the hilt. Iran went through the experience of the Iran-Iraq war, 8 years of devastating war between 1980 and 88. They lost possibly as much as 500,000 people, but they were defending their land, and they insist on staying and defending their land. So what's going to happen is that they're going to devastate Iran. They're going to try to destroy as much of Iran as possible, because that's all what they do. That's all what they know. They did that to Gaza. They did that to Lebanon. They did that everywhere. They did it in Vietnam, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, every place. That's all what they know. Destruction. This is what imperialist powers do. This is what the Zionists, hardcore Zionists, as they did in Gaza, will do. But that is hardly achieving their strategic and political goals. So, in the final analysis, people have to look at, will they be able to have a regime change? Will they be able to have a collapse of the regime or a breakup of the country? In most likelihood, they will not. They will fail, because they cannot do it. Air campaign does not break up a country. It does not have a regime change. It does not. It could not actually change the composition of the political situation there. So, what are we left with? Then we're left with a war of attrition, in which they will be suffering as much as, even more, the Iranians are, because they cannot take this for weeks. And if you look at the United States itself, Trump came with the promise that he's going to end forever wars, and now he's starting one that it will be very difficult to end, because there is no end in sight. He would have started a war in which much of the assets, military assets of the United States, would be spent, perhaps tens of billions of dollars or more, on something that cannot be realized. And then we're back to where we are. He has set 3 goals. None of these goals are achievable through this military action. Iran is not going to have regime change, not going to collapse. It will be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to break up the country, because of the geopolitical situation, as well as the current composition of Iran's neighbors, Turkey and others. They will not be able to strip Iran of its missile program. That's impossible. This is Iran's insurance. They will not be able to impose in Iran any kind of change in its foreign policy vis-a-vis supporting its allies and the so-called axis of resistance. Iran was always willing to have a nuclear uh, uh, agreement, a nuclear treaty, vis-a-vis its nuclear program. It had one back in 2015. It was Trump that abrogated it in 2018. So at best, you may go back to some kind of a modification, but the Iranians are not in the mood now to negotiate anything. They have already been burned twice. So the Iranians now are going to set the condition. So the most likely outcome of this war is that the Iranians will not agree to go to the to the uh, to what happened before this war started. They are not going to agree to the conditions and the rules of engagement that happened before the war. They're not going to agree to have these sanctions against them. They're not going to agree to have an imposition of their programs, whether it's a nuclear missile or others. There has to be a real change, because now that they had paid a terrible price for this, both in treasure and blood, their country has been devastated, it's been destroyed by this aggression, and they have repelled them, and they have a war of attrition in which the other side would have to admit defeat, and they have to change their policies. And therefore, the whole world must now wake up after this war is over, that this prophet of doom, this person, was trying to come and impose his will in the whole world, who's trying to come and say, I will be the president of the world and my word is the word, is just a fake person that he cannot do even anything to advance any cause of peace as he claims. So changes have to come to uh, to bear. People have to understand that Iran will not be a vassal state to the United States. Iran will not compromise on its sovereignty and independence, that they will defend it to the utmost until the other side backs down. Israel will not be the hegemon in the region. The countries of the region now are waking up to the fact that Israelis don't care, except that they want to rule, that they want to be in control, that they want everybody to submit. They want to strip every country of its capabilities so that they can impose their will on everyone. That is unacceptable. That would not be accepted. It's very unfortunate that many of the Arab countries have compromised on their sovereignty, have compromised on their independence, that they're not truly sovereign and independent, and therefore they have allowed the United States to have all these military bases in which they really have little say in how they are being used. And then they come and complain that the United States have been using their airspace and military bases in devastating another country. This is the price you pay. So that has also to change. People have to understand also the United States didn't care about their safety and security, couldn't protect them. The United States gave most of its interceptors to the Israelis so that they can protect Israel rather than protect their allies in the Gulf. So there will be a huge change, geopolitically speaking, in terms of the regional order, but that will not happen until it is uh, shown that the United States and Israel were unable to fulfill, to achieve their objectives of bringing Iran to its heels, of having Iran surrender or capitulate, in breaking up the regime or uh, changing the regime or breaking up the country. None of that would take place, and therefore we will having new realities on the ground in which we could have a much better future or much doomer future if they decided to go in the route of trying to use a nuclear weapon, tactical nuclear weapon, or something in which we will have a completely new global order, completely new facts on the ground. I believe part of this, as you have pointed out, was the United States was trying to put it thought. I mean, Trump is so simple-minded sometimes. He doesn't think in ways that could actually contradict how he sees the world. He doesn't look at at the world as it is. He wants to impose certain realities as he sees them. And he thought that he can go and grab Maduro and take over the oil of Venezuela, which he did. And now he said, okay, if I can take over Iran, have a regime change, then I will have I will have control over the oil of Iran. I already have control over uh, much of the oil and gas in the Middle East. So when I have all this, then I will be able to dictate to China, in my rivalry to China, the terms of how that relationship would advance. In other words, in this uh, multipolar world in which the United States and China are competing, uh, what Trump wanted, he thought that if he can get his hand on Iran's oil, in addition to Venezuela and the Middle East, he would be able to dictate to China much of what he wanted that relationship to be, rather than constrain China or allow China to expand, particularly in East Asia, in the East China Sea and South China Sea, and being a regional hegemon. But that's going to fail. Iran will be an independent, will be sovereign. It will come out of this battle, out of this war, out of this confrontation with the United States and Israel much stronger, I believe. And therefore, its relationship with China and Russia would be strengthened. And then Trump will have to face not only Iran and China, but he has to face the whole, I believe, BRICS in which case, economically speaking, the dollar will be weakened and the whole economy of the world will shift more towards the BRICS country. And as the United States military wanes with this confrontation, its credibility is shattered and its economy is collapsing with almost 38 trillion, which soon will become $40 trillion of debt as the dollar is weakened and as the inflation gets up and the whole economy of the United States gets impacted, then I think we're having a new world order in which the American empire is cracking.
Let's talk about the Arab states for a bit. So you mentioned that the Arabs are hosting several military bases. They're not being protected by the Americans. In fact, the Israelis are being protected by the Americans instead of the Arabs who are hosting military bases. Now, there was talk before the war started that the Iranians might have wanted to hold off, even though they knew a war was coming because they didn't want to fire the first shot, to have the Arabs on their side. That seems not to have been the case in terms of the start of the war. They are attacking the Arab states in the Gulf region, I think, more than they're attacking the Israelis. I think the Emiratis claimed that they've been attacked more than all the other states combined. I might be incorrect on that. But I think the Emiratis have been attacked the most. What do you believe the strategy is there for the Iranians in regards to the Arab states, and what do you think steps or paths are available for the Arabs to maybe avoid war or to try to de-escalate the situation?
Well, I will only try to explain. I'm not trying to justify, but it's very important that we explain the strategy behind what Iran is doing. Iran is a middle power at best, does not have a real air force, it does not have a real navy, it does not have it cannot compete in the conventional sense with superpowers or extension, like Israel gets the most sophisticated technological weapons. And therefore, what we are witnessing is an asymmetric warfare. In an asymmetric warfare, you employ the capabilities that is available to you. And in this case, you want to inflict as much pain on the enemy as possible. And in a asymmetric warfare, you go after what is called soft targets. Now, it just happens that the Arab world, particularly in the Gulf region, that these are weak states, mostly families, and they don't have a lot of population. They have a lot of wealth, and for many years, for decades, they have this relationship with the United States in exchange for protection and security. They would be able to give them many things, including to sell the oil in petrodollars, including to invest much of the excess of the wealth in the United States, and so on and so forth. And part of that protection is to have military bases. These military bases are supposed to protect these countries. Some of them say we're going to protect you against Iran, and others say we're just going to protect you against any enemy. Now, when the United States is going to have an aggression against Iran, and speaking of the language of international law, any place by which an aggressor uses in order to have an aggression or they go after a state from that place, that becomes a place of aggression, and therefore it's a legitimate place to lash out against. And according to the Iranians, much of the sorties, much of what's happening here is that, by the way, also add to that the use of the airspace. That's why, for example, Turkey did not permit the United States to use its airspace, otherwise, it becomes complicit in that aggression. But unfortunately, Israel has been using the airspace, whether by permission or not permission, of Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, most of the region, and therefore they became complicit. Now, if they are not allowing the United States to use their bases to have aggression against Iran, they must prevent it from doing so. But we have seen that That's not the case. I mean, it's well known. I mean, people now have all kinds of documentation. The radar that was taken out in one of the Arab countries was there, helping the Americans mount these aggressive sorties against the Iranians, devastating Iranians. So Iranians, from the standpoint of Iran, they have every right to go after these bases because they are soft, they are easier to hit, they are American territory. When you sign an agreement with the United States to have a military base, basically you cede sovereignty over this part of your land. That's the whole notion. In fact, if an American soldier commits a crime on that land, on that military basis, they are not subject to the law of that state. They are subject to martial law. They are subject to the American military or American jurisdiction, but not to that. So, from the standpoint of Iranians, these are places where they have been aggressed upon, and therefore they need to go after them. Now, you can argue the wisdom of this policy in terms of its political impact, but you cannot argue that this is illegal because it is legal in international law. Now, there's another aspect, certainly, to this, which has to do with, again, going after soft targets and inflicting economic pain. Because if the Iranians are going to compete in terms of who is going to endure more pain and who's going to inflict more pain on the other, this is not simply a military incursion. This is not simply a military conflict. It is in every aspect. The global economy is fueled by oil, 20% of which comes out of the Strait of Hormuz. So if they're able to prevent these tankers, these huge oil facilities, from producing oil or from transporting oil, then that's going to involve everyone, globally speaking. If they leave the conflict simply so that the United States and the Zionist regime have the complete freedom to devastate and destroy Iran where no one else is paying attention or paying a price, certainly that is not to the advantage of Iran. But they have these cards that they play. And by the way, this is not something, they didn't innovate that. This is being used since war began, whether it was global wars, World War I, World War II, and so on and so forth. They use all these tactics all the time by having blockades, by closing straits, and so on and so forth. Now Iran saying it's not going to allow a single tanker to go through the Strait of Hormuz. The United States says they're going to escort, but that's going to be a monumental task because it's very easy to hit a tanker. Now, if they prevent 20% of the oil shipment from going through the Strait of Hormuz, then that means the price of oil is going to be impacted. That means the person in the streets who's paying to fill the tank of their car would be impacted. That means the whole world will start asking, why are we having this war? And that's going to have an impact on how we stop this war, because the whole thing is, why are we doing this? And they will find out that they're doing it for Netanyahu and Israel, because Israel wants hegemony, because Netanyahu has something against Trump in which he is extorting him or something. So all these are tactics that the Iranians would be using. As I said, they are effectively using tactics that will actually yield results. This is not a conventional war. This is not two armies facing each other on the battlefield. This is not about gaining land. This is about whose political objective would be realized at the end of this confrontation. U.S., Israel, and Israel, they want regime change. They want breakup of the country. The Iranians are seeking that they will not allow this, that they would be able to actually stay and survive and defend their system and defend their country, but also come out victorious, meaning that they want to end the sanctions and they want to be vindicated that they have been doing everything possible in order to find a resolution to this crisis, and they have been prevented because Israelis wanted to change their regime. And of course, after years and years under sanctions, they're not going to go back to the to the previous situation, the anti-state, the previous situation. So they have to change. They have to make changes, and they can't make that until they defeat their enemies. And they can defeat their enemies only through this war of attrition, by which the enemy at the end will say, enough is enough. Trump is going to withdraw. Let's remember last year when Trump started a war against the Houthis in March, and he was giving all these bravado statements about how he's going to devastate and end the Houthis. And at the end, 2 months later, he just cut his losses and left. He lost billions of dollars in that campaign, and he knew that this is fruitless. He can't defeat the Houthis, and if he can't defeat the Houthis or change their regime, you think he's going to change the Iranian regime? I mean, this is so unbelievable. It's remarkable how these people do not understand the history. They don't understand the depth of these regions that they go and devastate in wars of destruction, as we have seen now.
A lot of commentators online are talking about how it's the Shia states or the Shia actors in the region going up against Israel, America, and the Sunni states. I mean, apart from maybe the Palestinians in Gaza and some Sunni groups here and there, it seems to be the case that Sunni states have aligned themselves, for the most part, with the not necessarily with the Zionist vision, but definitely with the American vision for the region. Is this in fact the case? Not just on the surface level, but on a deeper level. And what do you think can explain why there is this divide, which seems to be on sectarian lines?
I think we're confusing some religious terms with realities here. This is not about Shia Sunni thing. This is about a revolution in Iran that happened to be a Shia, in which they have a new philosophy about being independent and sovereign, about having a real meaning of defending one's self-determination and trying to establish a civilization. Now, it just happened to be Shia because the leader of that movement, the leader of that revolution, was a Shia scholar, Khomeini. Now, the other Sunni states, they're not ruling by Sunnah. They don't care about the Sunnah. It just happened, that they inherited this title, but these are not Sunni states, so to speak. It just happened, historically speaking, that they were following some madhab that belong to the Sunnah. So what we're having here is completely different visions. There are people who think that they can ally themselves with some international powers in order to advance certain agendas. This is how they look at life. They have no real regard to Islamic principles in terms of abide by them to be the overall or the overarching philosophy by which they live by. If they happen to be Sunni or Shia, doesn't matter. Azerbaijan is Shia. Are they following Shia? Of course not. That's not how it happens. Iranians have a different philosophy. And now the so-called Taliban is Sunni. I mean, they have a different philosophy as well. So we can't lump everybody together. But when you look at the so-called Sunni states in the Arab world and try to understand what motivates them, what are the objectives they're trying to do, you will find, first of all, that most of them are not real representative governments. They don't represent their people. There is a disconnect between the ruling elites or the ruling families and their people. And then you have a problem with the elites in these countries. The elites have not come to grips with defining what the real issue, what the real problems in the Muslim world are. So, on one hand, we saw the Arab Spring, for example, in which people were defining the lack of democracy, the lack of representation, the lack of self determination, tyranny, corruption, and so on and so forth. And they went after, and they had some successful experiments in 4 or 5 countries. And then the counter revolutionaries were able to come and bring back the state back to where it was, even worse. And that gives you a question: what is the real problem here? And I believe the real problem is that we are not independent. They would not allow you. The international powers, the foreign influence, the foreign imposition on most Muslim countries is so deep in every aspect, particularly when we talk about economics, we talk about debt, when we talk about military, when we talk about uh, all kinds of influence, culture and otherwise. They're so entrenched, it will be very difficult to chart your own recovery or your own course without getting rid of this foreign influence, without eradicating foreign influence. And therefore, people have to understand, particularly the elites, the ulama, the people who are trying to lead and change their societies, that the real problem in Muslim societies, and that goes particularly within the Arab world, is that we are not sovereign, we're not independent, that we are occupied, and that the epic or the height of this influence and the height of this control and the height of this uh, uh, hegemony is the Israeli, because Israel thinks that they cannot survive without having a total and full control over the whole region. That means they're not going to allow any country or any society to unite, to advance, to prosper, to build a civilization or advance science and so on and so forth, because they think that is a threat. So they're going to come after them. If two countries want to unite, they're going to break it up, like they did with Nasser. If one country wants to advance in certain scientific fields, they're going to go after their scientists. If one country is trying to advance economically, they will try to ruin it. If one country is trying to establish democracy or establish some sort of a representative government, as we saw in the Arab Spring, they're going after them. I mean, I saw in Washington how they were going, the Israeli lobby, to make sure that none of these experiments will succeed. Not only that, but they will go after every country to try to break it up. So they'll break up Sudan into 2 or 3 countries. They want to break up Libya into east and west. They're going to break up Yemen. They're going to break up Syria. They're going to, they want Syria to be 4 countries: Kurds, Alawites, Sunnis, and so on and so forth, and Druze. So that's what they do, because they think this is the only way they can survive. Unless we deal with this challenge, you will not be able to build any kind of meaningful society or meaningful civilization. You can't really advance forward. Now the Arabs needs to realize this. So allying themselves not only with the Zionist regime, but also with the United States, which is basically the patron, is the one that is financing, that is funding, that is taking care of the Zionist project to make sure that it imposes itself on the region. We saw this interview with the American ambassador in Israel. I mean, what other evidence do you want? Not only they embrace the Israeli project as it must survive and stay, they embrace greater Israel. They want to have an Israel that may extend from the Nile to the Euphrates because of some myth that they read, because some of these nonsensical stories that they read in some of their books, by which they think that by supporting Israel, greater Israel, or even Israel that goes from the Nile to the Euphrates, that somehow this is how they're going to live their faith. Now, this is so aggressive and so uh, in your face type of thing that people cannot ignore. Unfortunately, we have a system in the Arab world by which people are trying to ignore this. And I don't think we can ignore it for long. I think after what's happening today, after people saw that you have a Secretary of Defense, American Secretary of Defense, in which he is calling openly for a crusade against Muslims, in which he writes in his books and on his arms that this is the final battle, this is Armageddon, this is how we're going to conquer, this is how we're going to bring about a defeat, a lasting defeat of the Muslim world. people eventually will wake up and say, what's going on here? That we can't allow this to happen, that we can't be complicit in our own demise. And whether the rulers or the ruling elites will wake up and reform or not, reform is coming. The United States and its empire, I believe, is on the wane. It's collapsing, and over time, they will have to be replaced, and they will be replaced with genuine uh, local and developed powers by which people will wake up to the fact that the only way they can advance their civilization is by confronting this foreign influence and rebuilding their societies so that they become truly independent and sovereign.
Do you believe that this current war of aggression on Iran is a result, directly or indirectly, of the Al Aqsa flood operation? Or do you think that this war was inevitable regardless?
I think we have to look at the situation in a more comprehensive way. The Israelis captured some documents from one of the computers of Hamas, senior leaders of Hamas. And then they started leaking this correspondence taking place between Haniya, who was the overall leader of Hamas, and Sinwar, who was the Gaza chief. And in that correspondence, you can read actually and reconstruct what was on the mind of Sinwar, what was on the mind of the leadership of Hamas. I think it's pretty clear that what we have, and of course, many of the evidence that came through later on to explain that what we have was two trends within Hamas. There is one trend that thought Hamas is a resistance movement with a political arm. That was pretty much the one that carried out Tufan al-Aqsa, led by Sinwar and his fellow uh, people in Gaza, and of course was supported, I think, by Haniya. And then you have another trend which looked at Hamas as a political organization with an armed wing. These are the people who believe that they need to be part of the Arab politics, and that the most important thing is to be the overall representative or a major player in representing the aspirations of the Palestinians, and they are willing to play politics and do all kinds and sorts of things. Now, these two trends are within Hamas. The trend that carried out the um, the Tufan al-Aqsa October 7th operations is more idealistic, and they think or they thought that on their own, by accumulating the capacity that they did and by exercising the utmost courage and the utmost training and ability to carry out such daring operation, that eventually they could liberate Palestine. And the other trend is more of a pragmatic one, and they think that through political uh, operations or through the political uh, negotiations or political dealings, they can perhaps get some Palestinian or restore some Palestinian rights. In my view, both trends are mistaken because both lack the understanding of the nature of the struggle. What we are witnessing is a settler colonial movement. We are witnessing a supremacist, racist ideology in the Zionist movement, in the Zionist enterprise, by which they came with certain understandings of how they are going to be the hegemon and the country that they will build, how it will control the whole region. And therefore, to do that from the perspective of the Zionists, they couldn't do it on their own. So you have to accumulate so much power, and we have to understand the nature of that power. To understand the nature of the power of the Zionist movement, that will take us into a lot of uh, areas by which I do not have time to explain it, but I did write about it. I put it into 12 different imperatives. And when you look at these imperatives, you will find that the Palestinians on their own, they cannot overcome the power of the Zionist movement or the Zionist enterprise. This is beyond the capacity of the Palestinians to overcome it. And therefore, the task of the Palestinians is to stay on their land and to make sure that struggle continues. Because if they are exiled, if they are dispossessed, if they are depopulated, if they are forcibly immigrated, then it's going to become much more difficult. So the task of the resistance movements, the task of the Palestinians is to stay on their land. Now, when we deal with the other situation about how we deal with this Zionist threat, is that we have to understand its sources of power. We have to understand the strategies they use in all disciplines, and we have to develop counter strategies and build a global movement to confront it. That's in a nutshell what needs to be done. So when we talk about what the Palestinians are capable of doing or not doing, or what the resistance movements or what Sinwar did what he could. And he thought that this is something that he was able to contribute. But certainly, most certainly, the impact of the Tufan al-Aqsa was to append, to change how the Israelis look at their situation here. Before Tufan al-Aqsa, they thought that they can actually impose their will on the Palestinians, and that they can normalize with Saudi Arabia, and they can be the hegemon of the region. But after Tufan al-Aqsa, that feeling actually was hardened. Now they want to do this and more. In the past, they were willing to uh, accept, or they were willing to overlook some of the capabilities that some of the players in the region have, whether it was Hezbollah in Lebanon, or Hamas in Gaza, or Iran, or even other places like Turkey and Egypt and Pakistan. But now, after Tufan al-Aqsa, they concluded, again with their supremacist, racist mentality, is that the only way they can survive is by stripping all players, all potential enemies of all resources that they have, or at least have control over them. And that's what they have been trying to do. They're trying to do in Syria, in Lebanon, in Palestine, now against Iran. But eventually, they will not allow any player in the region to have any capability that will threaten them. This is a tall order. They just simply can't do it. 7 million people cannot rule over 600 million people. We have this region between the Arabs, the Turks, and the Persians, almost 600 million people. 7 million people cannot impose their will on them. So if they want to have a perpetual war, I can predict to you that eventually they will be defeated because they can't simply. But that's exactly what they're trying to do. Now, Sinwar certainly did something that's going to be in the history books, and it's going to be hailed as something that was a prison break, sort of speak. But I don't think he has even contemplated or foreseen what this could lead to. But certainly, it has led to a lot. But the reason it has led a lot, not just to the decision that Sinwar took, but also to the overreaction of how the Israelis uh, have inflated their role and what they have done. And I think this overconfidence that they are displaying, this supremacy, this supremacist mindset that they have, this hubris that we hear from Netanyahu day in and day out is what's going to doom them, because this false pride and false um, uh, achievement that they think they did is what's going to doom them at the end. They will not be able to defeat 600 million people, no matter how much they do.
Professor Sami, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you coming on with us.
Thank you.